Welcome to today's discussion. I'm Sava, head of HealthTech at HTEC Group, and you are listening to our series of podcasts that cover the so what around health tech innovation. The target is anyone with a vested interest in the trends, but with a practical angle and practical stance. The themes we cover will go across the entire patient pathway and product development path, and in generally, the most exciting and seemingly not so exciting parts of what's happening with healthcare today. Today's conversation circles around the necessary evil that all MedTech innovations have to abide by: compliance and regulation. Yes, everyone knows we need it, but are we letting regulatory efforts blindingly drive the innovation process? What are the gaps? What are the roadblocks? How do we unlock those? So to answer those questions, our guests today represent two sides of this coin. Miloš, head of quality and compliance from our MedTech excellence team at HTEC Group, and who guides the rigorous process to make sure medical devices are safe. And Hristina on the engineering side, who actually has to build the medical products that need to comply to these regulations. Thank you for joining us. And I'll just give a brief pass to let Hristina and Miloš introduce themselves. Hristina, you want to say a few words?
Thank you, Sava. So my name is Hristina Panovska. I have been in this field probably since waterfall was trending. So started off as a software engineer in the automotive industry, actually very regulated industry. And that was my kickoff into this world. Later on, I probably had more work to do related to the healthcare industries, and now I'm here at HTEC working in the medical devices ecosystem as an engineering and delivery lead.
So you have to build all this stuff within the regulatory constraints and still have it be innovative and impactful. Okay, easy, right?
Difficult challenge.
Great. Miloš?
I'm the bad cop, apparently. She's the good one. I have an engineering background. Worked for several years in financial and energy domains, so also regulated, but not that heavily that healthcare is and life science. But the last 8 years I'm in healthcare, so I moved from engineering to the dark side to prevent patient adverse events and making the devices and software solutions and tools safe, efficacy-wise, great in quality. So I'm here at HTEC now freshly, but I'm trying to help our clients to set the right strategy and right path to get in line with regulations and have a successful product launch on the market, because otherwise it's not worth anything.
Great.
Thank you for having me.
Great, thank you. Okay, so first question, top of mind is, I know from the engineering side that there's sometimes tension and constraints when you're doing medical device innovation. Is there always have to be tension between compliance, innovation, and quality? Like, is there a tension or no?
I don't think there is any tension from your side, Miloš.
No.
Usually the tension comes to our side. So in general, technical people's scope of interest is the work they do. So they need to be creative and they just jump into development and focus on their work. And the regulatory and compliance is a big unknown to technical people, basically. And the workload it brings, if it's not planned correctly, if it's not mapped into the process early on, it will be very difficult for them to cope with all it brings. So this is one of the reasons why tension may come to place.
But how much additional work is there, like versus a non-medical product?
Everything they do, they have to justify why they're doing that. So we need to produce a large amount of documentation, large compared to nothing in the non-regulatory application. So this can be a distraction for them because when technical people work, they are getting into their creative mode probably, and this is like another burden that defocuses them from their regular working day.
I'm going to pass this to Miloš in a second, but I want to ask then, does that mean you have some engineers that like to work on the very earliest stages before you have to document? And then you have the flip side when you really get into like the overhead detail. Is it that much of a burden after you have to start really documenting everything?
It's enormous burden if the process doesn't involve the documentation. For them it is definitely, and it's very difficult to do so because not everybody from the technical people, it's not some magic that documentation happens from the technical people. Somebody is not in the comfort zone for writing, for example, and pulling that knowledge, and the knowledge is there, it's with the technical people, developers. It has to come from there, and then it spans throughout the regulatory.
So how do you break down? Do you have teams that are broken down between those that are very good in the early stage, and then those that are very good at once you get into the detailed development process?
It's good to find those people, the ones that have more organizational skills probably, and have them on board for regulatory on time, so they can focus and control stuff early on. And definitely find the comfort space for every technical people there.
So one more question, then I'm going to ask Miloš's perspective on this. On the once you get really into the let's say the more required documentation and detailed phase of development, what keeps people inspired in that phase?
I know that well-managed process, project management process, works well. For example, much of the workload can be set as a meeting, for example. They don't have to spend individually time to write something. It can be done on those meetings with a PM, with a Scrum Master, whoever is leading the, let's say, agile process. That works very well if it's defined early on before development.
Good project management makes all the difference then.
Yeah, definitely.
Miloš, why don't people just, keep staying in the pre-regulatory phase of innovation?
I have first to thank you, Hristina, because she made a lot of good starting point. I will start with saying that I think that the wall between good and bad side was turned down years ago when widespread use of agile and other lean methodology was introduced also in the healthcare. This is, again, big thanks to the industry that led the way. So it's not me and them, it's more, but we are collaborating. So the stress went very down. And as already mentioned with Hristina, the important is this awareness by the non-regulatory guys that having a process defined and sharing this awareness with everybody prevents dangerous and costly work afterwards. Because with compliance, it's like with security, it cannot be retrofitted. It's very costly. It can, but it almost brings you back to the starting point. So doing it from the beginning is the proper way, and having a clear understanding, mutual understanding of what needs to be done and why are you doing. Also, the why is very important because everybody has to understand the commitment that the patient safety must be there and the efficacy of the device. So the output should be a documented device manufacturing process and the working prototype that can be tested, that demonstrates that it has a good relationship, a good ratio between medical benefit and risk to the patient.
Who monitors that benefit ratio and risk ratio? Who's most responsible for it?
This is, as already mentioned vaguely with Hristina, it's important that you have a very strong social capital in the company when you're developing any health tech and life science products, because you have to have guys that understand the ethics behind doing some processing. You have to have clinicians, because the clinicians that run this clinical risk management process, they have to demonstrate this benefit early on in the ideation phase. because if there's a negative ratio, a discussion should be raised if we stop this initiative at all. So clinicians in this case are those running the assessment, the risk assessment tests are very important and key here. And having those early on is crucial for the success.
So the integration of the MedTech sounds very similar to thinking about security at the very onset of building a product, from hacking, from all the things that come into mindset. Like you can't bolt on security at the end, or it's just much more costly. So that mindset, is there something? So there's kind of a dichotomy. You have diagnostics and you have therapeutics in the medical space. And you have digital only, and you have kind of a digital hybrid. Everything's digital
combined device and so
for in these days going forward. How do those characteristics change between diagnostics and therapeutics? And is what's the process that is more difficult when you go to a therapeutic device versus a diagnostic device?
From regulatory perspective, the process is the same because patient safety can be affected in diagnosis, wrong diagnosis, or late diagnosis, and on therapeutic side, mistreatment. But I guess evidence-wise, maybe the therapeutic side has this issue that depending on the risk, on the classification, you have to get more human trials involved. So maybe it's more heavy on the clinical trials level than the diagnostic one. The diagnostic one can be a lot of research-based and with a smaller cohort of patient. Therapeutics can be heavier because you have actual application on the patient. So I think therapeutics is a little bit heavier, but process-wise it's the same.
Let's say you have a digital-only product and a digital hardware hybrid product. Two teams, both very good at what they do. Where is there a difference between the amount of effort that they go through?
Mainly they are separated. They follow the same processes, also on the hardware side, because hardware does sometimes come with software. So every detail of our development process needs to be, again, documented. And the communication between the teams is also very important depending on the product. So more or less how you control the process, the same rules stand for everybody.
But I need to add something here. Where the hybrid or the pure hardware device is more under pressure is the other general controls and practices that need to do performance, like electromagnetic safety, contact with human skin, and so on. Those are extra steps that software doesn't have. And they are labor intensive and also costly and time consuming. So you have to have specialists or partners. They will do those particular testing. And there are very strict standards for every type of device, like for heart pump or chirurgical scissors on something, or some IoT device. It's very like bedside device or some monitor. It's very strict what test needs to be done. It's defined. And so it's more labor intensive, but the process is the same. This is called just the validation and verification that is more extensive because of its hardware. You can touch it.
So there's a question about speed to market. And is today's process as fast as it should go, or can it be two questions. Can it be faster? And the flip side of that is, what keeps people from what slows teams down?
I would say yes, because the standards, when you look at them, they're just guidelines for the development teams to do their best work and to actually pull out a device that will be safe and risk-free.
So yes, it could be faster, or yes, it's as fast as it can go?
I think it's fast as it can be. The problem is, let's say, lack of knowledge and slow adaptation from my perspective on development side. So our expectation would be teams to be more, let's say, enlightened by auditing bodies or regulatory consultants, so that will align the development with the regulatory needs. If they're not in line, then we have the problems.
So does that mean that an experienced team? So I'm trying to think of an experienced and inexperienced teams in these developments. So the experienced teams understand the regulations much more clearly at each checkpoint or at different phases all along the path. Where does it make the biggest difference?
So they don't have to understand every detail of the regulatory, but they do have to understand what is expected of them to produce at the end and to give to the regulatory. So that's the biggest difference, because if later on in the process, not experienced team will figure out what they need to provide, it's very hard, as Miloš said, to retrospectively pull out all the knowledge. And knowledge is lost throughout the development process.
So from your perspective, where do you see
I will
teams that are good and not good?
I will use the it depends answer. And it depends on the actual device. Why? For example, if you're an established device manufacturer and you're just building your new device based on knowledge from your previous device, the process can be very fast. And this is okay. And this is the same for Europe and the States. But if you're making a new device, there's a difference between Europe and the States, sadly. So it can be that it's proven. It's not can be with introduction with the MDR. Europe made a giant step forward backward. So every innovation now is happening in the States because time to market is faster due to how you demonstrate equivalence of the device. So you have a predicate device, and then you don't need the trials. Then you don't need to produce a lot of documentation. You just rely on the concurrent existing device, and you demonstrate that if the device is safe, yours is as well. This concept of substantial equivalence. In Europe, it's done this way. If you're a big company, you can certify using your papers, so you have all the technical details. But if you are a small startup and want to bring innovation to the healthcare market, it's very slow because you cannot rely to your competing device because nobody will disclose the data, and thus you cannot demonstrate that it's really equivalent. And then it's a long procedure and very costly because clinical trials cost there from €500,000 up.
So once you're in, you have an inherent advantage for the next follow-on product that's in the same space.
Yeah, and that's why Europe right now is like hindering innovation because it's protecting the status quo. Because big players will flourish, but this is estimated that due to MDR, 30% of the innovation is already failed. Like new device went elsewhere because last 40 years it was the rule: Europe first, and then other markets. Now it's like 30% more less innovation, and there was a survey by the. I don't know. We will put it maybe in the comments of the discussion. There was a survey that demonstrated that big and small companies will discontinue 50% of their devices in Europe. In the end of the transition period, so by 2024. And this will be a huge problem because some tools, some devices won't be there.
But is there any initiatives to change that right now?
Right now, no. Maybe what happens with Europe, the last month they will make a prolongation or something. But tools that were built on devices that were built like in the 60s, where standards weren't like where they are now, they cannot retrofit the documentation, demonstrate they are safe. And MDR has put a really high bar on demonstrating the safety. So like for an injection needle, this is an example, maybe you will have to do a whole new trial again. And this is very costly, and maybe it's easier to discontinue the product.
So the regulatory framework does impact the speed of innovation. That's
Definitely.
Number one. And the EU's updated guidelines and regulations are coming into effect at the end of 2024. I also looked at just in discussions with various investors that 80% of European MedTech ventures are basically looking to go to the US to go to market.
Yeah.
So why does it make sense to stay in Europe? We're kind of switching on the area, but maybe
it's hard to answer why. maybe
Logistics.
no logistics. Maybe the reimbursement path is a little easier in Europe than in the States, because the market, how the reimbursement works, is more more based on social beliefs. And then you have big insurers that cover whatever doctors, let's say, it's useful. In the States, it's like more evidence-based, and this mechanism works differently in different countries, different states. So I believe only reimbursement, maybe it's a plus, but it's not that clear. Also, it's not really.
So let's focus back on the U.S. We're going to come back some more later on European, U.S. kind of differences. We're in the U.S. then on a regular corporate path. They have this advantage of being in the market of predicate devices themselves, and going forward, where do corporates lose an advantage relative to the new ideas? Like they because if that's the case, there would be very few new entrepreneurial ideas coming in. Now, granted, a lot of the big medical device companies do a lot of M&A, and they acquire these early stage ventures once they've proven certain kind of milestones in there. But until then, it's pretty costly, and there's a lot of risk. Where do corporates lose an advantage in this? Let's look at it from the product development side. Where do they fall?
The inertia of the system they have already in places. So it's very difficult to change the mindset of the people who use them. Those systems are very hard they're not adaptable to something new. For example, if you want to integrate some new part, and this is where they fall behind the new company startups that are very innovative, and they have all the right people. Also, yes, resource-wise, people who have worked in those companies are used to the technology that was at hand like 5-10 years ago. So
even more.
That's even more. I have worked on systems that were like 18 to 12 years started.
Those were young.
What about on the regulatory side? They have their own departments. They have massive resources on regulatory. Is it something where's the hindering part of that?
I think it's starting from the strategic mindset, because big companies, especially in the States, were big silos. They're always trying to protect their own ecosystem. So they weren't willing to share, to collaborate with others. They won a hospital and they implemented their solution, then they are done. And they're just protecting the status quo. Now, when regulations impose like interoperability, like TEFCA then does the exchange of data, like the ONC so National Coordinator for Health IT does, like for what's the program? The 21st Century Cures Act and so on. These silos need to be brought down. And those companies are dinosaurs, most of them. So their decision process is very long. And agility, like some small companies, have this advantage. But also, I think, to some degree, these companies also play this game. They are not taking risk. They invest somehow to the startups, and then they acquire them. So this is also maybe their strategy. But if some great company like Epic, for example, has to evolve, it's a slow process. It's a slow process because the mindset of people is like, we are doing this like 30 years and it's working. And why change it?
Yeah, basically rely on old fame.
Yeah. And the status quo, you have the recurring revenues, and they have a lot of patents. So they have maybe 20 years of something that will be paying off. Why risk it all?
Well, so let me add a different set of stakeholders here now in terms of developing new medical technology-based products. You have your regulatory perspective. You have the doctor, the practitioner in perspective. You have a patient perspective, and then you have the engineering technology perspective on those four levels. So why is it that these large companies don't react to patients? Because the new stuff that comes in on the innovative side, they're going to come probably from a combination of the technologists, the practitioners, and the patients in some balance. I'd say it rarely comes from regulatory. They're more of a control system, but
lately it's coming actually, again, from the States, it's coming from the regulatory. Because the whole TEFCA and the 21st Century Act, Health Century Act, is built on the idea that patient is in the center. So patient can and must have access to health data, must be able to go from different states and still have a quality treatment and so on and so on. So I think in the coming years, those big players will need to evolve. We need to evolve, and I see on the market already players that are moving, like acting as aggregators, like middlemen between those silos and so on. And I must really applaud what FDA is doing here, and also the ONC for Health IT. They are establishing a lot of programs that are like catalysts for innovation and for small businesses. There are a lot of programs funding small businesses to reduce the risk of innovation and going to market. So like the early reimbursement and payer program. So you can get engaged with potential payers and also users, and they say that this has a business economic model that is feasible, and the actual doctors will use the system. So you already know before you go to the prototyping. So this is a huge advantage that is not present in Europe, for example. And there are a lot of those programs, and also they have foundings for those programs. So USA is famous for not doing like state-based innovation, but they are founding startups a lot now for doing this private industry-led invention. So I think it will be 23, 24, 25, it will be a nice time to be in the industry.
Okay, so the industry has come up with a certain amount of structural barriers already. Data was maybe siloed. You have payer dynamics going in. So what you're saying is that the FDA can lower these barriers, and then that kind of releases the ability for people to think of new ideas.
Yeah, because from my perspective, reading between the lines, what is FDA doing is making data available for everyone, including the patient, to be used in new smart ways. And that's like AI now from 2019 is big let's say factor in FDA decision making, because they saw that FDA is now on the if you see the Omara hype curve, they are now like going to how it's called stable. They are stable now and growing to mature productivity. So now they support. They saw that all those shiny ideas like 10 years ago were outlived, and now concrete use cases are coming to market, and now they are supporting it, actually financing. And now with all the regulatory they brought up, they are setting the path to have data available to do like population health, better outcomes, guaranteeing better outcomes for patients, so on. So I think a lot of new stuff will come soon out.
I know from when nanotechnology was the buzzword at the time, and everyone had these bottom-up assembled, self-assembling viruses that would build buildings and everything else. There was an immense amount of hype. Two conclusions came out of that. The first money in nanotech basically came out of conferences and publications. That was where the first money was made. But the second one was it was very irregular, an uneven amount of innovation. So certain areas in chemical coatings that you can argue are nanotech based had practical applications, and others were just too far away until you can really get some of the carbon nanotube processes in, or finding out certain mechanisms for manufacturing and control. AI feels the same way, because it's a really broad area. So when the FDA is making these rules, is it still really, they're enabling the innovation, but they're not the source of the idea?
No, No, they're enabling. They are setting the ground. They're setting the ground, and if you compare now to Europe again, Europe doesn't have like any exceptions. Any guidance is different than software medical advice for AI, but AI is fundamentally different. So innovating in Europe with AI is dangerous because every notified body can have its own judgment. In the States, it's one body. It's the FDA. And it's Center for Devices and Radiology Health. In the Europe, you have notified bodies, and everybody can have its own opinion, its own interpretation of the MDCG guidelines, which are like regulations up top of MDR. So that's why innovation is happening in the States, and AI will be big there. But also this medical things, medical IoT. It's happening in the States.
Okay, we got to give some benefits to innovating in Europe, or guidelines for the European medical agencies. But there are definitely structural advantages in from a payer perspective, and it can be a boon. So, recent statistic in terms of last year, 20% of the U.S. GDP was in healthcare, and half of that went through payers. So that's 10% of the GDP is going through payers in the U.S. It's quite a bit of influence in innovations and what matters on those. So when you look at what matters to the payers versus what matters to the patients, we're looking at compliant, like the driving influence is really what influences the payers. So something earlier you said, which is the industry influences the regulatory perspective, is the fact that the regulatory side is driven by is there real innovation in medicine, or if not, why not? Why not? Because the real innovation is going to happen where the money is going to be paying for it too.
Yeah, it's for all new technology faces the same challenge. Basically, you have to develop it, test it, assure this is safe, and that get payment for it. Otherwise, like it's like Edison said, the value of the idea is in use of it. So innovation, if it's not supported then to market presence, it's worthless. And I remember a statistic, but it's like 3 to 4 years old, that like only a third of innovation is being used in the USA market. There are devices that are on the market but not used because there are no financial incentives and no real use cases. And that's why it's important having such programs like the FDA's early payer communications program.
But don't you think that's exactly why regulatory hinders innovation? Because you start on a developmental path to an idea. So if we step back and say to this question of where do the innovations come from, and then between the physician or practitioner, between the patient saying I need this solved, the technologist that's kind of trying to piece these things together or sees a new tool to introduce. Once they start on this rigid path, when they get over that hurdle where the product development teams now have to document everything, it sounds like it's hard to change. Like once you're in, you're going.
Yeah, but
there is also a process dictated by the standards for you to be sure that what you're building does solve a problem.
But is that contradictory?
I don't think so. It's a very expensive process to start with, to build a medical device. So we can look at it as a sort of a protection for
so
the sponsors,
I have an angle on this. From agency perspectives, everything is trust-based. And now especially with AI, because AI can be an evolving algorithm, and you have to be able to demonstrate that your process is sound to deliver testable and as transparent as explainable algorithm. So basically, what, for example, FDA is doing, they have a TAP program, so it's Total Product Lifecycle assessment program, or assessment. Yeah, basically they try to give principles how to build AI-based solutions that will be evolving, will be ever-changing, and still compliant. And this is actually helping innovation. So I don't right now. I don't see that regulation is really blocking, in a way, the innovation.
So let me describe 4 layers to get to a medical acceptance of a medical product. You have to you're trying to achieve some effect. Mm-hmm. So you build a technology. So there's a technology layer to deliver whatever you're trying to deliver. It has to show effectiveness. The clinician has to want to use it. Mm-hmm. And then there's the 4th layer is this incentive, financial incentive. Who is going to pay for it today?
Exactly.
How far along, at what point do you say, check, the technology works without having to rework and adjust? Because you start on a path and like you said, Hristina, you have to make sure it works. But look at the technology space, which is I'm constantly testing and rapidly adjusting ideas and interviewing stakeholders and saying, is this what you want? And you might hear the answer you want to hear, or the entrepreneur or the product owner hears the answer they want to hear. But in fact, when it comes on the market, they're like, that's nice, but I don't really need to use it. So is the regulatory constraint on the product development side just conditions you to say, I gotta go 20 steps before I'm allowed to change? Because it's such a pain to change because of the documentation.
There is a difference on this question, how you deal with AI and how you deal with medical devices. That's why it's good early on to have form good partnerships with providers, for example, clinicians, and that hard stop should be when you decide to start the clinical trials, for example. At that point, or if it's a medical device, before you do the 60601, for example. There are hard stops, and they have to be, they shouldn't come too late in the process. They have to be according to plan, basically. And at that point, everything has to work.
Is it hard to change paths once you go on developmental cycles?
I believe after one of these processes is started, it's hard. Miloš can add more details, but I believe it's
I will put
hard.
a different angle on it. Why? Because we have to understand that regulations and standards follows best practices. And what are they doing? They are trying to prevent patient harm. Okay? So actually, what the regulation says and standard says, like the 6, 2, 3, or 4 for development life cycle, or the FDA tier, not FDA, tier 45 from the American Association for Medical Devices, they prescribe gates. And the first important gate, it's even before the clinical trial, it's in the early design. And what is how it's called, or what the gate checks? Did you study the functional feasibility? It can be built, it will be used. Did you check the human factors? Did you study how the device is used in real scenarios by physicians? So you see and identified all the risk. Have you demonstrated that there is a beneficial risk-benefit ratio? And is there an economic model behind it? If the answers are yes, you should go with this first early prototype. It can be also just in a drawing to the really development phase. So this is the first gate, and it's very important. And this is stated in the standard actually. So here standard tries to guide you in a sound way, because as you said, a lot of startups and also grown mature organizations fail because they are on the hype. They build some algorithm, they see it like it's working, and it's delivering. They have like big biased internal physicians and say, yeah, everybody should use this. Then they go straight forward, they engage with the FDA or EMEA and so on. And then in the end, they have a certified device nobody will pay for because there's no clear use case and nobody will finance it.
Okay,
so regulation here helps.
So those in idealistic senses absolutely make sense. It's very common, especially you can take two cases of this. One is where you have grant funding, that you've gotten funds and you have to achieve all these milestones, and this happens very much so in Europe with Horizon projects as well as in SBIR projects. You can do everything according to the use of funds, and you've done all your milestones, you've done everything, and the product never is a success. But the granting agencies will say, "This is okay. You at least didn't abscond with the money."
This is this paradox,
And then you come to this gate. Someone has to say, "Is the economic model right?" And you're actually the entrepreneur or the product owner has pressure many times to say, I need to get money, so I got to show that this is going to work. Here you go. It's human factors. I have a few doctors that like it, but there's really subjectivity in each one of these questions.
I agree, and it's sad to see it because a lot of these standard-founded projects, I worked a lot of them, are basically proof of concepts for research exercise. So we in the industry are making something that we know that the output is just a research paper with a demo, which is sad. But I don't take those kind of this way funded innovation to be really innovation. It's just some kind of subsidiary. So states and governments are giving money for researchers, basically. The real research is between this relation. Physician sees the text and unmet need, or patient. Also, patient have voice here. Says, I want to be able to have remote meetings with remote visit with co-doctor. So also patient has this voice. Especially in the UK, they have a patient representative on every project. There is the innovation is born, and then it's the role of the brave innovator and also brave entrepreneur how to sell it and how to get funding, because it's always a risk.
Okay, so does this come back to the culture in the product development side, where before you start getting burdened by the requirements of documentation and the other controls that are in place, which are in place for good reason, does the culture have to say, we're really willing to scrap all the stuff we just did, which happens, before in a typical venture in a product market fit, you're trying to figure out business model validation. But in a medical device sense, you're trying to do these plus you have to document it along the way. Is there a simple way to do this, or is it a culture thing that says, you know what, we thought we had functional, we thought we had human factors, we thought we had the risk benefits correct. We gotta scrap it and go ahead. Are the product development teams have to be ready for that, or do you see different phases of teams that you got to stack together to make the whole innovation work? A certain type at the front, a different attitude or expectation in the talent to launch. What do you think?
I believe that when you start the project, you already know if you have not proven that this product will work, if there are unknowns, you kind of have to expect that. And that's a common scenario probably where, for example, universities that do the research, they have a lot of people changing on the project, and they don't keep everything in order for regulation, and it can happen for them mostly to restart everything and and get a clean start, basically.
Okay, so can I propose an idea then? What this sounds like you need kind of an innovative regulatory project manager that works really hand in hand in the project, that also has a change agent responsibility to say, look, here's our risk in product development because of the medical side is we might have to scrap this because we're making an assumption that people want to buy this product. Mm-hmm. And if it ends up being saying no, and then you're trying to shoehorn these things, it may not matter to corporates. They'll be like, look, we can get market share and shove this in. So one of the instances was this early warning system with sepsis. They shoehorned this early detection system, and it had terrible results by the way they trained the data on it.
It had biased.
And so now, but there is financial, sometimes perverse incentives to get something on the market quickly because you got to show something to investors and everything else. So are we stuck with a slower innovation cycle because we don't have the right change agents or right communicators to really, and to have courage to say like, look, you want to be, on the market or not? We got to do it this way. And maybe that's the definition of a good medical entrepreneur or product owner.
Actually, if I may jump here, going slow doesn't mean that you are the last in the market in the end. This is, as I said, change management, innovation officer, something has to be a visionary and has also to be held accountable for such decisions. The worst it can happen, it also happened to me, is that you say, okay, we try to figure it out if there's a need, we can do it, and you make a pilot. And then you see that it's great, and everybody likes it, and then the CEO or some other top level say, go to the market with this. But you know that the engineering was told this is a demo, and it has a lot of limitation, and you build upon a really shaky platform or base. So the first iteration, to be smart, should be in PowerPoint, mock-ups, and verified through human factors engineering studies with clinicians if they're gonna use it, or done in a virtual, like say, with virtual engines, not go and code it. Yes, code some spikes like for assessing if it's doable with some algorithm, but not producing the whole solution and then saying it's good and go with that, because that was just a demo. And the guys that were developing, they knew that it's a demo. With this demo, you just demonstrate you have a sound decision for the first gate. Is it worth going forward, investing big money, going toward clinical evaluations if it's not a new novel device and so on, or not? So it will be fast, like really fail fast or drive. And the mistake is really this affection to the first pilot. I was in the companies, we made this, we liked the pilot, and then we, for 15 years, were saying, what a bad decision. So.
Yeah, especially, a lot of that risk can be reduced by co-developing with the target customer as well.
Absolutely.
Especially in health systems.
Absolutely.
That's what the agile process actually supports.
Absolutely. We are past the time that the client was just giving the first, trying to describe the unmet need and then saying, yes, this is it, what I wanted. We are past from those time.
It's a high responsibility on the front end, but then you have to have this ability to adapt as well.
That's why usually startups are more, proficient in bringing innovation, because it's in their core culture doing it this way, being engaged with partners and being held accountable for every step. The accountability line in startups is far shorter than in big corporations.
Okay, so what makes the right culture for medical innovation when you consider all the regulatory constraints that are in there? What are the top 3 characteristics?
I can start. Basically, if we look at the 3 core principles of Agile, we can say that those are transparency, willing to inspect frequently, so check if we are doing the right product and the right way, and accountability. So knowing who does what and when. So transparency means that you have also different types, different types of team members. You have UX, human factor engineering, you have developers, you have quality control and quality assurance guy, you have regulatory guys. You have to have a lot of people to cover all the angles. You have to have somebody that's like from philosophy for ethics, you know. You have to have the patient voice. So maybe product owner can be the patient voice, and the product management it's the client voice. You have to have all. So otherwise, this is a team sport. Innovation is a team sport. And bringing device to the market is a team sport. Do you have any angle on this?
Hristina?
Let me think. Only a second. I am processing. So I would agree with you, Miloš, definitely. I would extend the list definitely.
Yeah. It's a long list. It's a long list.
It's a long list.
Clinicians, I forget. Risk managers.
Not just like how can you define the very complex field with just 3 words, probably.
Yeah, it's a long list.
You know, so coming back to the role of the physician and stakeholders, you know, you take something that is, you take melanoma. Melanoma was hugely in trend in 2007. There must have been, or 2005-ish, there was like 50 startups in the Boston area alone, probably. You have technologies that can do very good processing and prediction, well, and diagnosis, and all can be worked. It can get some level of approval, but it's had a hard time to get adopted in the health systems, screening for skin cancer. And you look at the dynamic of it, it's because one reason is you can't, like when you look at dermatologists, they can either monitor or cut on a lesion. There's not too many things you can do with it, and you can make more money doing other procedures depending on the cash pay or reimbursement scheme. And then the general practitioners who have very little time per patient may not be able to scan everyone, and for them it's safer to escalate it and say go see a derm, and they don't want to do the analysis because if they don't send it to the derm and they end up having skin cancer, they get penalized greatly. And in another sense, they also get they're balancing not too many secondary referrals because that affects their kind of economic profile. So the technology is there, the analysis is there, but it's a really hard business model. And maybe it's the technology. Maybe that's not the solution.
It's not a technological problem. It's a complex human problem. That's why it's very important in the early stage and get involved the right people that will engage with those. You have to have clinicians that engage with clinicians and discuss how this will help them to do more with less, maybe. So
I'd argue it's a product problem.
Yeah, it's how you position. It's how you present, how you pitch, basically. It's not technically. The technology is there. It's how you convince that this will enable them to do like from 5 patients in a day to 13, or the mortality rate will go down. There are studies out there that, for example, AI in heart failure detects really in a great way if you will have a failure shown and so on. And it was unmoral. It was done in UK not to use AI, and they finished the study and applied this technique to all patients, both cohorts. So this came from this engagement between clinicians and the product team. So this is important. It's not a technology problem. We need to have those people that understand the unmet need and how to sell it in a way to everybody, to the business, to the hospital, to understand why they're going to pay for it and how they're going to get their reimbursement, to the clinicians. So, and also the patient. Patient has to understand that this new technique it's something better than the actual state of art now on the market. So they are also willing to pay a bonus, a premium, to get a treatment with new device.
I want to just cover one aspect around clinical data and its role from a regulatory and from a development side. You have a conflict right now between kind of publicly available data and then proprietary data that fuels innovation. And this is probably more true for AI algorithms and functionality about how certain approaches architecturally are being done, because the data can reveal a lot about the architecture and product strategy on an algorithm basis. So what is the regulatory framework okay as it comes to clinical data, or is it a problem right now from a product? Does it slow down product development? Is there any impact of data clinically, like the clinical data, that either is irrelevant to the current regulatory and innovation speed, or does it slow it down because of the movement to, let's say, far more algorithmic centric products?
For us, from engineering perspective, definitely depends on what do you plan to do with the data and how do you plan to store it, keep it, and we need to be very clean here in how we manage the data that comes from those trials if the system is electronic. That again falls on the technical people to manage. Their data needs to be validated and so on. If the data is going to see the light of day, we should at least be able to enable the sponsor or whoever will want to publish the data to do so if time comes. And this is from our perspective, this is where our burden comes, for example. Also designing maybe the data in a proper way that it can be queried, searched, and so on. This is the burden depending on what's the plan with the data. Some sponsors, providers don't want to expose the data problem.
Yeah, it's a difficult question with many answers. Let's say first that there are different regulations covering data and different interests. You have the IP interest, you have the agency, so transparency and safety interest, and they are conflicting. Then you have competition and competitors relation. Then you have privacy view on it. And then you have scientific value and public health value. So what is going now is that it's still hard to have quality data to be used, like, for instance, training algorithms in AI and modeling and changing the model. And this is a big limiting factor for innovation. They are in genomics. We also work on this. We have some models supporting for future research. But this data is very proprietary and kept secret. If we now jump to the agency and patenting and IP protection, as you said, disclosing data discloses a lot of how you train your model and so how the algorithm works. But you still have to disclose something, so white boxing it, in order to demonstrate it is efficacy and also its safety. Because I remember there were examples, for example, when AI detected diagnosis based on the hospital label in the image, not on the actual image, because the algorithm understood that this hospital is more reliable for this. And if it was from hospital A, it was always this disease. So you have to disclose some amount of your model, and when disclosing it, you're disclosing your IP. And if you disclose it, you can also disclose that it's based on other already patented or other concurrent other device on the market. So you are not doing really innovation. So you cannot patent it. So it's really a conflict of interest. And then you come to privacy. And another angle, I remember now. So privacy-wise, you have to get consent to process patient data. And it's different in different regions and different countries, but basically patient has to understand who will use it, for what reason, and with whom would be shared. This is the minimal hygiene. And the last one I remember now is how data is used according good clinical practices. There's a standard that is used, is universal, luckily, so it's for Europe, Japan, Australia, and the States. How to use data and how to build informations and also models and knowledge out of it. So using the data in a way that is scientifically proven that will guarantee that your device or your solution is safe.
Yeah, but differential privacy is almost going to become a required standard in going forward. Like there's the days of massive kind of data sets that aren't able to be differential I think is going to be gone very, very soon.
But as I said, luckily agencies now are going toward accepting data and clinical trials associated from third-party countries. For example, you can have a clinical trial running in Serbia or in Slovenia or in Hungary, and use this data demonstrating your device is safe and efficient in the States or in a Europe country. This is great, but you have to follow the good clinical practice. So the partner you have to run the clinical trial needs to have, again, certain profile, and also the level of the report, the clinical evaluation report, needs to be in a high way.
So is it almost a sense that any kind of medical data today, these consents are becoming ubiquitous. I mean, it's rare to find anything.
Yeah, but there are different
data.
levels of how one has informed consent, one has explicit consent.
Sure. But that's standard now in any medical database, data set is almost mandatory going forward. So one of the problems some of the largest medical device companies have today is they have all this data, a legacy, and modern and today like current data that is unstructured, but they have legal constraints to try to unlock all of this because of these consents.
Yeah.
And now their challenge is that they say they have their own ideas on it, or they have pathways they want to test, but they can't begin to unlock any of that until they get legal agreements in place. So because of that, I'll put that in a compliance category on it. Is it just that, we have a 0-day, call it 2021 or 22, that says going forward, if you're not able to do add the kind of data controls that allow for differential privacy and various degrees of consent, you don't even build the set. You might do something for research purposes to test ideas or prototype, but you won't even begin to build that without those controls in place.
Okay, it really depends on how the actual institution or the government has consent defined. I know examples in Slovenia, for example, that they were collecting consent that it can use data also for research because they were university hospitals, and they have the research department. And when you accept the procedure or some pathway, you accept also this. We have also to consider that maybe yes, this is a gray zone, but anonymized data is not then personal data. If we can, in some countries, you can do this, that you anonymize patient records and you then export to a different team that they cannot make the connection between patient and data. And this is the importance of getting this data right for new systems in a structured way. So you decouple the identity, the demographics, from the clinical data that can be used then for training algorithms and public health reasons. And yes, old companies, the huge one, have unstructured data based on some AHR models they have. But I think, and I see that they are moving toward having at least API representations of structured FHIR-based data. So they can use then, specialized tools that extract the data and make processing. But this is a journey. It's a journey because you have to clear the data. And the data is now, it's a lot of garbage there.
Great. So I know no matter at what innovation level that we're at, whether it's a corporate new device initiative or a follow-on product side or the entrepreneur or early stage idea that's growing, depending on whether on which side of the spectrum, whether it's on diagnostic or therapeutic, it's a dynamic play. The agile sense is absolutely critical. It is also a very you have to put the right teams in together, and by far no one has it cracked at many levels. And so I think one of the main conclusions out of this is this: you have to have the right teams in together sooner than later. The mindset matters, the culture matters in terms of how you do development. I'd call this intellectual honesty about the market. And sometimes you need multiple eyes in order to make sure you're not building what you think is validated, functional, economically based and everything, and get these in the market. And I think experience plays a large play in that. So this is a great discussion. Any final comments, Miloš?
As I said, I've been interrupting you, but yes, sooner is better. Just this. The sooner you start factoring the compliance, the regulations, standards factor in the project, the better it is, because you will make a lot of shortcuts. Maybe you will even see that it's not a medical device; it's a tool, and you can avoid the pathway of regulations. So the sooner is better. It can save a small amount of hours, can save tremendous money.
Sooner is better. Hristina?
I absolutely agree. If it's sooner, then we are going to see regulation as safeguards. And sooner onboard all the team, including the technical people. That's my final advice. And
I will summarize recommendations for the EU in terms of accelerating these things. There are a lot. And there's a lot of feedback to a lot of device companies of all sizes in terms of getting these out. Experiences that there's still a lot of room to improve, and the market that we're moving into right now is going to necessitate being spot on. Fewer leeway for delay on some of these.
Yeah, if I may add just regarding Europe, it's said watching that Europe is part of the international consortium that are setting standards, but they are now actually in the position that we are passive listeners. They are not engaged in stepping forward to get on board with the innovation train. We are just waiting and listening what they're doing, and eventually we will go there. But Europe is going behind in this.
That's a pretty bold statement. It would be good to hear. It would be good to hear from some representatives there and see what they actually what the view is, because a lot of times there's a lot of consensus building that goes in, but I know for a fact there's a lot of extremely exciting innovation in places depending on the locations.
Yeah, it's the fact that no matter how the company is big and established in the market, I think it's more than 70% say that the new location is killing innovation in Europe.
Would love proven. To add that reference in the podcast.
I will find it. I have it somewhere in my bookmarks. But it's.
Do you know the top reasons why?
Uncertainty
of what?
Of guidance, because Europe has MDR, which is fixed and won't be changed, I think, in the next decade. But then they are built this MDCG guidance. Now we are, I think, in the 11th version. And they're trying to do the explanation what they meant. And this is changing in conditional times, and nobody knows where they will go. So uncertainty is killing, because you can be brave, but not full. So this is the main reason. And also, you have to deal with different notified bodies and different agencies also. Yes, it's unique, but there are also sometimes some specifics. So they should go.
I think we can have a whole discussion around just the EU itself. But it's pretty broad and
interesting to have some industry leader that is present in both countries. So both maybe also even in Japan, to see their view. But the industry survey says this.
Okay. So that's our podcast for this week. We hope you enjoyed the discussion, and stay tuned. There's many more to come. If you have feedback, please send it over in the links below in the comment section or wherever possible to send it to us. Thank you very much.